After the two women were introduced, now we are introduced to two men. And this is again very informative because Bankim is kind of setting the stage for the entire drama to unfold, and we have protagonists who are being introduced one after the other. Uh, we are told the older of the two would be above 30. He was a tall and stout man. It was because he was too stout that he could not be said to possess a good figure. His complexion was dull and dark. There were no features on his face which could give him the least claim to handsomeness. On the contrary, he had something positively unattractive about him. In fact, his was not a common face. At the same time, it was difficult to define its peculiarity offhand. He had a dhoti of Dhaka manufacture on. A long twisted Dhaka chadar was tied round his head in the shape of a turban which hid even the few wisps of hair that had still remained there. His dark and corpulent body could be fully seen through the shirt of Dhaka muslin he was wearing, and with it his gold amulet, which peeped out of and on. But the thick gold chain which adorned his neck had actually intruded outside his shirt. The shirt had gold studs fastened with a gold chain. All the fingers had rings, and there was a huge bludgeon of peach in his hand. The two small feet were enclosed in English shoes. So we are told about this man, and his name is Mathur, and these are two cousins, as the chapter tells us about. The title itself is two cousins. He's The narrator informs us that there's something dark and evilish about him. There are no claims to handsomeness. There is something positively unattractive about him, and he seems interestingly like a combination of English products, but seems to be a person who's rooted here. And we'll come to know about it more in the fourth chapter when we are told about the entire family structure itself. Now let's contrast that, like Kanaka and Matangini's description. Let's contrast that with Madhav, the protagonist, uh, and the previous description of Mathur itself. Madhav, the narrator says, this man's companion was a remarkably handsome young man about 22. So, if Mathur is around 30, this young man is about 22. His clear, placid complexion had turned a little dull either through want of exercise or too much comfort. His clothes were good but not very costly. A dhoti, a fine chadar, a cambric shirt, and English shoes. There was a single ring on one finger and no amulet or necklace. The elder man addressed the other. Well, Madhav, have you returned to Calcutta again? Why is this infatuation? One can see the clear distinctions here in the description. Compared to Mathur, Madhav is handsome, is quite attractive. Unlike Mathur, who is clearly boisterous because he has so many ornaments around, the kind of a feeling of despotism that comes in, that there are lot of ornaments that are festooned on his body. Madhav brings in a certain kind of a grace and simplicity without compromising on his upper class and caste upbringings. So that's why you will see that the clothes were good but not very costly. So he is not trying to show off. So there was a single ring on one finger, but no amulet or necklace. So that's the difference that we can see. The other person is wearing all muslin clothes, he's wearing a Dhaka chadar, he's wearing a gold chain and amulets, and the shirt had gold studs also fastened to with a gold chain. All his fingers had rings, that is Mathur, right? So we can see a clear distinction in terms of someone who's uh, who is who likes to show off and is not attractive, and there is something that is evilish about him. That's what the narrator is suggesting at this point of time. And we are told that Madhav has a penchant towards Calcutta, that he keeps going to Calcutta. And when we go to fourth chapter, when we are told about the entire family tree, we get to know that both Madhav and Mathur's fathers were brothers. That's how they are cousins. While Mathur's father stayed in the village and made money, became a zamindar, landowner and everything, Madhav's father went to Calcutta and ensured a good education for Madhav. So Madhav, that's why, imbibed all the cosmopolitan values, all the modern values, whereas Mathur smacks of nativist parochialism. And therefore, he mocks Madhav here. Madhav, have you turned to Calcutta again? Turn to Calcutta again. Why is this infatuation? Infatuation, Madhav says. If my liking for Calcutta be infatuation, why shouldn't yours for Radhaganj be called same? Why? Why not? You have spent all your life in the shade of mango gardens of Radhaganj. You love Radhaganj. I love Calcutta. And Mathur says, the filth of the drains rotten with rats and cats thrown in, surely a feast for gods, that is Calcutta. Madhav said, it's not for these that I go to Calcutta, I have business too. Oh, business indeed, Mathur says, new horses, new carriages, visiting all the sharks in the town, throwing away money, burning the oil, drinks for anglicized friends and pleasures. What are you staring that way? Let's focus on this part. And this is what Calcutta and colonial modernity is also associated at this point of time with. It is associated with cosmopolitanism as well as debauchery. So all the people who are products of this colonial modernity at this point of time are thought of suspiciously by nativists or people who are champions of ideas of nativism as people who participate in debauchery itself, the kind of corrupt practices of modernity. With education comes alcoholism, and that's why drinks is there. Then about spending money, also about whoring at this point of time. There is a lot of involvement of prostitution that is also represented at this point of time in 19th century literature, and Bankim is talking about all those stereotypes that are associated. And Mathur says, yes, business means you go there, you just go there to spend money, you go there to enjoy your in carnal desires, and you visit all the sharks in the town, money lenders and money, burning the oil, drinks for anglicized friends. All of this is what comes to us as we understand with this border between, with this distinction between the nativist or the rural and the cosmopolitan, between and therefore, Makarand Paranjpe, in an early essay on Rajmohan's wife, thinks of it as an allegory of India at that point of time, where Mathur represents the old world, Madhav represents the new world, and Matangini is caught between both those as a symbol of India. So it becomes a tale of modernity in that sense. It will be very interesting to look at their descriptions in chapter 4, because that's where we get to see the family tree itself, and we were told about the family, how the family came up to at this came to be in this place itself. And the chapter is titled "The History of the Rise of Zamindars," or history of rise and progress of a zamindar family. So what we get to see is a small description, and this description is again about how both Madhav and Mathur's grandfather came to inherit the money through manipulation, chicanery, and everything. He was a servant to a zamindar who married twice to have male heirs, but then without that heir, the zamindar dies, and Banshibadan Ghosh, who is the servant at this point of time, Madhav and Mathur's grandfather, gets married to the younger wife of the zamindar and inherits the property. Then he kind of converts all that property into money and comes to Radhaganj to build this empire of sorts. Very interestingly, this is again part of that colonial modernity story, a story of colonialism itself, how money becomes a moving metaphor, a signifier itself, because money can now be transferred. It's not anymore in the sense of property, and if you have money, you can actually also go up in the social ladder itself. And it also talks about the corrupting effect of money also. There are several tales like this in 19th century, where money as a as a kind of floating signifier. The best example that I can think of is Fakir Mohun Senapati's 6 acres and a third, again, which is about having property and from there making it into dissolving that landed property into this money economy itself. So what we get to see is modernity and negotiations of modernity with negotiations with modernity by Banshibadan itself. So we are told Banshibadan carried with him a splendid fortune to Radhaganj, the seat of his humble paternal abode, and he knew that money can be dangerous, and that's why the negotiation is very interestingly done here. What he does is, if you have land, people immediately know that you are rich, but if you have money, you can also prudently make use of it, like he does, that he did not make a display of his immense wealth, and then he kept this money for 3 of his sons. These who deemed long possession had conferred security were no longer restrained by the same prudential considerations and purchased zamindaris, built houses and everything. So we are told in a way that what Madhav, Mathur are living on is basically ill-gotten wealth that that Banshibadan made with certain kind of manipulations and some chicanery itself. So we are told, so at the base of this is a negotiation with colonialism. As I said, if one has to read this novel, one has to be very careful, because you will not find a typical anti-colonial stance here. What you see is the everyday negotiation with colonial structures like law, like property, like money, gender equations, and the institutions of colonialism that come in. That we will soon see that it is property which is at the heart of this novel, where Mathur starts conspiring to rob Madhav of his property. So what happens is that The eldest son, Ramakant, by dint of prudent and able management, improved his share, and after having lived a green age, bequeathed all to the equal and abler hands of his only son, Mathur, whom we have already met. Ramakant had viewed with eyes of jealousy the encroachments that were made in the ancient manners and usage by the influence of Western civilization. So, we clearly see a sense of nativism that comes in, and steadily forbore to send his son to a English school, which he condemned as the thing not only useless but as positively mischievous. Mathur was early associated with his father in the management of zamindari and proved exceedingly apt scholar in the science of chican, fraud and torture. In a sense, Bankim is here championing the idea of cosmopolitan modernity itself, colonial modernity itself, that we need education, we kind of need English education at this point of time, because this kind of nativism is not desirable, because the kind that is demonstrated by Mathur and before that his father Ramakant is not desirable, even if they have been very good in terms of management of their property. It's not what we should be aiming for. He contrasts that with the fate of Ram Kanai, the second son of Bangshi Badan, was different. By nature indolent and extravagant, he soon managed to throw his affairs into disorder. His house and garden were most magnificent, his estate the most unprofitable and worst managed. So, on the one hand, you have financial efficiency in in Ramakant, but on the other hand, you have sophistication in Ram Kanai. Some wily hangers on too played in the credulity and painted him in alluring colors of chances to which certain mercantile schemes propounded, presented, retrieving his affair. Ram Kanai followed their advice and placing himself under their guidance, took up his residence in Calcutta. It is needless to add that his advisers continued to fleece him of every farthing. One good result that, however, followed Ram Kanai's residence in the metropolis, influenced by the example of the metropolitans, he had bestowed on Madhav as good an education as he could have received in Calcutta. He had also accomplished the great object of his Hindu father's love, the marriage of his son with a girl of remarkable beauty, that is Hemangini, Matangini's sister. So, we are told that Matangini, and therefore I take you back to the first chapter when we were told that Matangini was not born in East Bengal. She is from somewhere near the capital. So, both Madhav and Matangini are the children of colonial modernity. So, we therefore see a distinction of Madhav and Matangini from the rest of the crowd that we encounter in this novel itself. Because they are children of modernity, they are able to exercise certain kind of agency. They involve themselves in certain transgressive behavior. They question and interrogate the foundations of conventional rules and social arrangements like marriage. It's very important here also to dwell a bit more on Madhav and Mathur. This distinction of Calcutta as that Madhav drawing his education from Calcutta, drawing his refinement from Calcutta, bringing that education modernity to Radhaganj itself, is also very important in understanding Mathur's villainy. That you have on the one hand, and then this is where the typical 19th century Calcutta modernist view is very important, because we see both in Ram Kanai and his son Madhav the same kind of stereotypes that are associated with modernity, that these are spendthrift zamindars, and they are city loving people, and they are engaged in a certain aspect of debauchery. but they have the redeeming quality that they are refined, they are educated, they know how to probably treat their women, if we see Madhav's case. Whereas in Mathur's case, as we will realize later, who is married and has two wives in his house, does not lead such a life of domestic bliss in that way. Has skirmishes there. The Bengali satire at this point of time is aimed at not the spendthrift Ram Kanai, but is aimed at obscurantist like Ramakant, and his nativist son Mathur himself. And you will see this in the way that they are portrayed. For example, Mathur is already shown to us as someone who is boisterous, as someone who is a show off. And this is also clear when we are also shown their houses. So Mathur's house later in page 73 of this book is mentioned as a genuine example of Mofussil magnificence united with Mofussil want of cleanliness. So it's a big house, but it's not clean, it's dirty, and it's not, there is no aesthetic sense itself. Well, the description goes something like this. From the far off paddy fields, you could see, you could descry through intervening foliage its high palisades and blackened walls. On nearer view might be seen places of plaster of venerable antiquity prepared to bid farewell to their old and weather-beaten tenement. Not unfrequently a young shoot of burr or less noble vegetable has struck its roots in the crevices of between the layers of brick. So we have like trees coming out from the brick, the cracks of the wall, and that's why it's a Mofussil magnificence with Mofussil want of cleanliness, and that's almost a description of Mathur itself. On the contrary, Madhav Ghosh's house is very well decorated, very well aesthetically managed, and the description comes in 94, I think chapter 8. He sat reclining in a mahogany chair covered with satin. A single but well-fed light illuminated the chamber. Some 2 or 3 English books were scattered over the couch, and one of these Madhav held in his hand, but he hardly read it. He sat with abstracted gaze fixed on dark but star besprinkled heaven which were visible through his open window. So you can see an imagination of a man who is thinking about abstract ideas, who is a thinker, who's probably a creative person, who even when he's in the village is thinking about universal and transcendental concepts or thoughts, whereas Mathur is groveling in material wants and desires and necessities itself, and he wants more of them, and that's the reason why he wants to rob Madhav, because he wants more and more money. So the greed is insatiable, and therefore we can see that the scale clearly tilts in favor of Madhav, in favor of colonial modernity. And if we add Matangini to the entire equation, then we come to know of his Bankim's clear penchant towards colonial modernity.